They say you should never judge a book by its cover, but Richard Sterling judged his wife by her worn-out sweaters and quiet demeanor. He thought he was the main character of their lives, a rising CEO destined for greatness, while she was just the anchor dragging him down. He cheated, he lied, and eventually he threw her out on the street to make room for a younger, flashier mistress. He thought he had won. But Richard forgot one crucial detail. In the game of chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. And when his poor wife finally played her hand, the entire world and the royal court stopped to watch him crumble. Richard Sterling adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of his office window. Behind him, the skyline of Chicago glittered, a testament to the world he felt he owned. At 34, he was the regional director for Apex Logistics, a man who drove a Porsche, wore bespoke Italian suits, and had just secured a merger that would likely fast-track him to the C-suite. He checked his Rolex. 7:30 p.m. He was late for dinner, but he didn't care. In fact, the lateness was calculated. It was a power move. Tonight was his 5th wedding anniversary with Jenny. Just thinking about her made Richard sigh with irritation. Jenny. Not Genevieve or Jennifer, just plain boring Jenny. When he had met her 5 years ago, her simplicity had been charming. She was a librarian, quiet, supportive, and seemingly in awe of his ambition. She kept a clean house, cooked decent meals, and never asked for much. But as Richard's stock rose, Jenny remained stagnant. She still wore clothes from discount racks. She didn't know how to network at galas. She preferred reading in their garden to rubbing elbows with the city's elite. She was an embarrassment, a relic of a life he had outgrown. And then there was Vanessa. Vanessa Klein was the marketing executive at his firm. She was sharp, viciously ambitious, and stunning. She knew the difference between a Pinot Noir and a Cabernet. She knew which fork to use. She looked good on his arm. Richard grabbed the manila envelope from his desk. It was heavy. Time to cut the dead weight, he muttered to himself. He drove home, rehearsing his speech. He wouldn't be cruel, he told himself. He would be efficient. He would offer Jenny a small settlement, enough to keep her quiet, and send her back to whatever obscurity she came from. When he unlocked the front door of their suburban home, the smell of roast chicken filled the air. It was nauseatingly domestic. Jenny was setting the table. She was wearing a simple blue dress he had seen a dozen times. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy bun. "Richard," she smiled, wiping her hands on an apron. "Happy anniversary. I was worried the traffic was bad." "Traffic was fine," Richard said, bypassing her attempt at a hug. He walked straight to the dining table and tossed the manila envelope onto her empty plate. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding into the wine glass. Jenny froze. Her eyes, a striking shade of violet that Richard used to love but now found unsettling, darted from his face to the envelope. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Did you buy us a vacation home? Is it the deed?" Richard laughed, a cold, barking sound. "Open it, Jenny." Her hands trembled as she undid the clasp. She slid the papers out. The bold text at the top screamed at her. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." She didn't scream. She didn't cry immediately. She just stared at the legal jargon. "Divorce?" "Richard, why? Is it because I burnt the roast last week? I can learn to cook better. I can—" "Stop!" Richard snapped, pouring himself a glass of the expensive wine she had bought, likely with money she saved from coupons. "It's not the roast, Jenny. It's you. Look at you. Look at this house. It's mediocre. You are mediocre." "I love you," she said, the tears finally spilling over. "I've supported you since you were a junior analyst. I paid the rent when you were studying for your MBA." "And I'm grateful," Richard said, his tone devoid of gratitude. "But I've evolved. You haven't. I need a partner who fits my future, not a relic of my past. I need someone who can stand next to me at a board meeting, not someone who looks like they just walked out of a bake sale." Jenny gripped the edge of the table. "Is there someone else?" Richard smirked. He didn't see the point in lying. "Her name is Vanessa. She's smart, successful, and she understands my world. She's moving in on Monday." The air left the room. Jenny looked as if he had physically struck her. "Monday? Richard, this is my home, too. My name is on the lease." "Actually," Richard pulled a second document from his pocket. "I spoke to the landlord. Since I pay the rent, he's agreed to transfer the lease solely to me, effective immediately. And as for the prenup—" "We didn't sign a prenup," Jenny whispered. "No," Richard leaned in, his eyes gleaming with malice. "But since you have no income, no assets, and no lawyer, I'm offering you a one-time payment of $10,000. Take it, sign the papers, and leave tonight. If you fight me, I will drain every penny I have into legal fees just to ensure you get absolutely nothing." Jenny looked at him. For a second, Richard thought he saw something shift in her eyes. The sadness vanished, replaced by a strange, icy calm. It was a look he had never seen on her face before. It was almost regal. $10,000, she repeated slowly. "For 5 years of my life." "Take it or leave it," Richard checked his watch. "Vanessa is coming over in an hour to measure the windows for new drapes. I want you gone before she gets here." Jenny stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't throw the roast chicken at him. She simply walked to the envelope, pulled out a pen from her apron pocket, and signed the papers with a flourish. "You're making a mistake, Richard," she said softly. "The only mistake I made was marrying a nobody," he retorted. Jenny placed the pen down. "I will pack my things, but remember this moment. Remember that you wanted this." She turned and walked up the stairs, her head held unnaturally high. Richard poured himself another drink, feeling a surge of victory. He had expected begging. He had expected a scene. But Jenny, as always, was weak. She had folded instantly. He had no idea that upstairs, Jenny wasn't crying. She was reaching under her bed to pull out a dusty, leather-bound trunk that had been locked for 5 years. She dialed a number on a burner phone she kept hidden in a hollowed-out book. "It's time," she said into the receiver, speaking in flawless French. He broke the contract. "I'm coming home." The transition was brutal and immediate. By 9:00 p.m., Jenny was gone. She had taken only 2 suitcases, leaving behind the furniture, the kitchenware, and the life she had built. At 9:15 p.m., Vanessa Klein walked in. Vanessa was everything Jenny wasn't. She was blonde, loud, and smelled of expensive Chanel perfume. She walked into the house like she was conquering a small country. "God, it smells like suburbia in here." Vanessa wrinkled her nose, kicking off her red stilettos. She looked at the dining table where Jenny's anniversary dinner still sat cold. "You, roast chicken? How 1950s? "It's over, babe." Richard came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She signed. "She's gone." Vanessa turned in his arms, a predatory grin on her face. Did she cry? Did she beg? She knew better. Richard laughed. She took the 10 grand and ran. Probably going back to her parents' trailer park in Idaho, or wherever she said she was from. "Good." Vanessa kissed him. "Now let's get rid of all this junk. I want modern furniture, sleek, white leather, and we need to get ready for the gala." The gala. The Silverleaf Charity Ball was the event of the season. It was hosted by the mysterious Foundation of European Heritage, a massive philanthropic organization that had just opened a headquarters in Chicago. Every major CEO, politician, and socialite would be there. "Tickets are $5,000 apiece," Richard said, a hint of worry in his voice. The divorce settlement and the new lease were eating into his cash flow. "Richard," Vanessa scolded, "you have to spend money to make money. If you want to be CEO of Apex, you need to be seen at the Silver Leaf. I heard a rumor that a European diplomat is going to be there. Maybe even royalty." Richard's eyes lit up. Royalty? Some duchess or countess connected to the foundation. Vanessa waved her hand dismissively. "Who cares who she is? The point is, the networking potential is insane. We are going, and I need a dress that screams, 'Future CEO's wife.'" The next 2 weeks were a blur of spending and renovation. Richard burned through his savings to appease Vanessa. They bought new art, a new car for her, and tickets to the gala. Richard didn't hear a peep from Jenny. The $10,000 check he wrote her hadn't even been cashed yet. "She's probably too embarrassed to go to the bank," Vanessa laughed one morning over coffee. "Imagine being that pathetic." But strange things started happening at Richard's office. On Tuesday, Richard was called into a meeting with the senior partners. He expected a promotion. Instead, he was met with grim faces. "Richard," the CEO, Mr. Henderson, said, "we lost the Kensington account." Richard froze. The Kensington account was his biggest client. "What? Why? I just took them to golf last week." "They pulled out this morning," Henderson said, sliding a letter across the desk. "They cited ethical concerns regarding leadership, specifically your leadership." "My leadership?" Richard sputtered. "I've increased their profits by 15%. "They didn't elaborate," Henderson sighed. "But that's a $20 million loss, Richard. You're on thin ice. Fix it or you're out." Richard stormed out of the office, furious. He called his contact at Kensington, but the number went straight to voicemail. When he got home, Vanessa was in a rage. "My credit card was declined," she shrieked. "I was trying to buy the earrings for the gala, and the card was declined, Richard. Do you know how humiliating that is?" "It's a glitch," Richard lied, wiping sweat from his forehead. He checked his bank account on his phone. His balance was red. -$4,000. He clicked on the transaction history. It wasn't identity theft. It was the divorce lawyer fees, the lease transfer fees, the furniture, the car payments. He was bleeding money. "I'll fix it," Richard snapped. "Just wear the earrings you already have." "I don't recycle jewelry, Richard." Vanessa threw a pillow at him. Richard sat on the white leather sofa, head in his hands. He needed a win. He needed the Silver Leaf Gala to go perfectly. If he could secure a new investor there, someone bigger than Kensington, he could save his job and his lifestyle. He had no idea that the ethical concerns from the Kensington account weren't a coincidence. Across town, in the penthouse suite of the Ritz-Carlton, a woman stood on the balcony overlooking the city. She was no longer wearing a department store dress. She was draped in a silk robe embroidered with a golden crest, a lion and a dove. A man in a sharp black suit stood behind her, holding a tablet. "The Kensington account has been withdrawn from Apex Logistics, Your Highness, as requested." The woman turned. It was Jenny, but her posture was different. Her eyes were sharp, commanding. "Good," she said, her voice dropping the flat American accent she had faked for 5 years, replaced by the crisp, aristocratic lilt of classic British nobility. "And Mr. Sterling's financial status?" "Critical," the assistant replied. "He is leveraging everything on the Silverleaf Gala." Jenny smiled, sipping a glass of vintage champagne that cost more than Richard's car. "Perfect," she whispered. Let him go to the gala. Let him think he belongs among kings and queens. It will make the fall so much more painful. "Are you ready for the reveal, ma'am?" the assistant asked. "The press has been briefed. The embargo lifts the moment you step onto the red carpet." Jenny touched the diamond necklace resting on her collarbone, a family heirloom worth $6 million. "I'm not Jenny anymore, Arthur," she said. "Genevieve of the House of Ardo is finally awake, and she is not happy." 4 days before the Silver Leaf Gala, Richard's world was fraying at the seams. The air conditioning in his office sat at a frigid 65 degrees, yet he was sweating through his 3rd shirt of the day. He stared at his computer screen. Another client had just cancelled. This time it was Sterling Cooper Investments, a mid-sized firm that Richard had personally cultivated for 3 years. The email was brief. "Due to a realignment of our corporate values, we are severing ties with Apex Logistics, effective immediately." "Realignment of values," Richard hissed, slamming his fist on the desk. It was the same vague excuse Kensington had used. It smelled like sabotage. His phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. "Babe, the caterer for the pre-gala cocktails needs a deposit, $5,000. Which card should I use? Also, I hate the drapes we bought last week. They look cheap in the morning light. I'm ordering silk ones." Richard ignored the text. He couldn't tell her that all his cards were maxed out. He couldn't tell her that if he didn't land a massive client at the gala on Saturday, he wouldn't be able to make the mortgage payment on the house he'd just kicked his wife out of. A dark thought wormed its way into his mind. Jenny. She was quiet, yes, but she was also desperate. What if she talked? What if she went to the press about how he discarded her? In the current climate, "A CEO abandons loyal wife for younger mistress" headline could be the final nail in his professional coffin. He needed insurance. He needed dirt on her. Richard opened a private browser window and searched for Cheap Private Investigator Chicago. He found a guy named Barry Gibbs, whose office was above a pawn shop and smelled like stale cigar smoke. "I need you to dig into my ex-wife, Jennifer Sterling," Richard said, sliding a photo of Jenny across the scarred desk. It was a picture from a barbecue years ago. She looked plain, wearing no makeup and a faded t-shirt. Maiden name Ardo. Find her skeletons. Did she steal from a previous employer? Does she have a secret drug habit? Anything I can use to keep her quiet. Barry Gibbs looked at the photo, then at the $500 cash Richard put on the table. Ardo. Sounds French. I'll have a file by Friday. Richard left feeling a marginal sense of control. Jenny was a nobody. Everyone had secrets. Once he found hers, he would own her. Friday arrived. Richard met Gibbs in the back booth of a greasy diner. The investigator looked rattled. He hadn't shaved, and his eyes were darting around the room. "You didn't tell me," Gibbs whispered angrily, leaning across the table. "Tell you what? Did you find something? Is she a junkie?" Richard asked eagerly. "I found nothing," Gibbs said, pushing the $500 back toward Richard. "Here, take your money. I'm off the case." "What? Why?" "Look, buddy, I ran her social security number. I ran her maiden name. You know what I got? A digital brick wall." Gibbs lowered his voice to a terrified hiss. "Her file is sealed. Not just expunged record sealed. I'm talking Department of State. Level 5 security clearance sealed. When I tried to bypass it, my system crashed, and I got a warning notification on my screen from a government agency I've never even heard of." Richard stared at him, confused. "Level 5? What are you talking about? Jenny was a librarian." "Librarians don't have files that require biometric clearance to open," Gibbs spat, standing up. "Whoever your ex-wife is, she's protected by people way above my pay grade. Maybe she's witness protection. Maybe she's an ex-spy. I don't know, and I don't want to know. Stay away from me." Gibbs hurried out of the diner. Richard sat alone, stunned. Witness protection? A spy? It was laughable. Jenny cried when she watched dog food commercials. But then, Richard smiled. A cruel, arrogant smile spread across his face. Of course, that was it. She wasn't special. She was a criminal. Witness protection? Richard chuckled to himself, pocketing the cash. My God, Jenny, what did you do? Embezzle? Sell drugs? It made perfect sense to his inflated ego. That's why she was so quiet. That's why she never wanted to travel internationally. She was hiding. This was better than he hoped. He didn't need details. The fact that her past was buried by the government was enough to destroy her if he leaked it. You're not just poor, Jenny, Richard thought as he walked out of the diner, feeling invincible again. You're damaged goods. And now I have the ultimate leverage. He went home to Vanessa, who was screaming at a florist on the phone. He kissed her fiercely. Get your beauty sleep, babe, Richard said, his eyes manic. Tomorrow night, we own this city. Saturday night arrived, draped in the kind of humidity that made silk stick to skin. The Silverleaf Gala was being held at the historic Palmer House Hilton, the grand ballroom transformed into a European palace for one night. Richard rented a stretch limousine he couldn't afford. As they pulled up to the entrance, his stomach was doing flip-flops, a toxic mix of anxiety and adrenaline. Vanessa looked undeniably striking. She wore an emerald green gown cut down to her navel, dripping in rented diamonds that Richard had put on a credit card with a comical interest rate. "Showtime, Richard," she said, checking her makeup in a compact mirror. "Remember, chin up. We are the power couple here. Everyone else is just background noise." The limo driver opened the door. Flashes of light erupted from the paparazzi, lining the red carpet. Richard stepped out, extending a hand to Vanessa. He fixed a practiced, dazzling smile on his face, ready for the barrage of questions. "Mr. Sterling, who are you wearing? Mr. Sterling, any comments on the Apex merger?" But as soon as Vanessa stepped out, the flashes stopped. The photographers lowered their cameras, looking past Richard and Vanessa toward the next car in line, a sleek, black Rolls-Royce Phantom with diplomatic flags on the fenders. "Move it along, folks," a security guard with an earpiece muttered to Richard, gesturing toward the entrance. "You're blocking the arrival zone." "Do you know who I am?" Vanessa hissed at the guard, furious that her grand entrance had been interrupted. "I'm Vanessa Klein. He is Richard Sterling, director at Apex." "Yeah, okay." "Name?" The guard checked a tablet without looking up. "Sterling." "Richard and guest," Richard said, his smile straining. The guard scrolled for an agonizingly long time. "Sterling. Sterling. Ah, right. You're on the general guest list. Second entrance to the left. The red carpet is for VVIPs and honored dignitaries only." Vanessa looked like she was going to slap him. "Excuse me? We paid $5,000 a ticket. Move along, ma'am," the guard said sternly, stepping aside as the Rolls-Royce pulled up. The paparazzi began screaming the name of a famous senator, stepping out of the car. Humiliated, Richard grabbed Vanessa's arm and dragged her toward the side entrance, which was essentially a glorified service hallway draped in some velvet. "This is unacceptable, Richard," Vanessa fumed as they walked through the metal detectors. "General admission? We look like peasants." "Calm down," Richard snapped, his own nerves fraying. "It's a mix-up. Once we get inside, it won't matter. We'll work the room." Inside, the ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the gilded ceiling. The air smelled of expensive champagne and thousands of imported white roses. An orchestra played Mozart flawlessly on a raised stage. The room was packed with the titans of industry. Richard spotted the CEO of Boeing laughing with the mayor. He saw tech billionaires and oil magnates. "Okay, there's Henderson." Richard pointed out his CEO near the bar. "Let's go say hello. Show him we belong." They approached Mr. Henderson, who was deep in conversation with a stern-looking European man with silver hair. "Mr. Henderson." "Wonderful evening," Richard said, clapping his boss on the shoulder a little too hard. "You've met Vanessa, my partner." Henderson turned, his eyes cold. He looked from Richard's sweaty face to Vanessa's plunging neckline with distinct distaste. "Richard?" Henderson nodded stiffly. "I didn't expect to see you here, given your current performance outlook." Vanessa bristled. "Richard is the top performer in his division." The European man next to Henderson raised an eyebrow. Is this the man who lost the Kensington account in a single afternoon? Richard froze. "That was a misunderstanding, sir. I assure you." "If you'll excuse us, Richard," Henderson cut him off, turning his back. "Baron von Hesse and I have actual business to discuss." Dismissed like a naughty child. Richard felt the blood rush to his face. Vanessa pinched his arm hard. "Do something," she hissed. "Don't just stand there." They wandered the room for an hour. It was a nightmare. Every time Richard tried to join a conversation, the circle closed off. People he had known for years looked through him. He saw the VP from Kensington, the man who had snubbed him, laughing uproariously at a joke told by someone else. When Richard caught his eye, the man simply turned away without a flicker of recognition. They were pariahs. Finally, they found their seats. Table 42. It was in the very back corner of the room, next to the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a waiter came out with a tray of appetizers, the smell of industrial dishwasher soap wafted over them. "I can't believe this," Vanessa sulked, stabbing at her salad. "We are sitting next to the help, Richard. This is your fault. You clearly aren't as important as you said you were." "Shut up, Vanessa." Richard drank his wine in one gulp. He was drowning. He had spent everything to be here, and he was being treated worse than Jenny treated the exterminator. Then the lights flickered and dimmed. A hush fell over the enormous ballroom. The orchestra stopped playing. A spotlight hit the center stage. The host of the evening, a distinguished-looking man with a British accent, stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests," the host began, his voice echoing through the silent room. "We are honored tonight to welcome the chairwoman of the European Heritage Foundation, a woman whose philanthropy is matched only by her pedigree. Please rise for Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Ardeux, Lady Genevieve." The entire room stood as one. The rustle of expensive silks and the scraping of chairs filled the silence. Richard stood up slowly, confused. "Ardeux?" he murmured. That name sounded familiar. It was Jenny's maiden name. But Duchess? Royal Highness? It must be a coincidence, a common French surname. Vanessa remained seated, scrolling angrily through her phone. Who cares? Some inbred European snob. "Stand up, you idiot!" Richard yanked her arm. "Everyone is standing." The massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. A fanfare of trumpets, actual trumpets, blasted from the balcony. And then she walked in. She was flanked by 4 security guards who looked like they belonged in the Secret Service. But no one was looking at them. The woman at the top of the stairs was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light, embroidered with thousands of tiny diamonds that shimmered like stars. On her head sat a delicate, intricate tiara, platinum, sapphires and diamonds, that looked older than the country they were currently standing in. She held herself with an innate, effortless grace. Her chin was lifted just enough. Her walk was slow, deliberate, regal. Richard squinted against the spotlight. The woman's hair was done up in an elegant, complex twist, highlighting her long neck. As she began to descend the grand staircase, the room erupted into polite, deferential applause. People in the front rows, the billionaires, the senators, were actually bowing and curtsying as she passed. Richard's heart hammered against his ribs. The woman turned slightly to acknowledge the applause, and the light caught her face. Richard stopped breathing. It was her eyes. Those distinct, striking violet eyes. "No," Richard whispered, his voice cracking. The champagne glass slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound loud in the respectful quiet. Vanessa jumped. "What the hell, Richard?" He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. His brain was trying to process the impossible image in front of him. It was Jenny. His Jenny. The woman who wore sweatpants to watch movies. The woman who clipped coupons for laundry detergent. The woman he had discarded like yesterday's trash just 2 weeks ago for $10,000. But it wasn't Jenny. This woman was terrifying. She radiated power. The air around her seemed charged. She looked utterly untouchable. She reached the bottom of the stairs. The host bowed deeply and offered her his arm. As she walked toward the head table, the table surrounded by the most powerful people on earth, her path took her past table 42, near the kitchen. She didn't slow down. She didn't stop. But as she passed within 5 feet of where Richard stood, paralyzed amidst the shattered glass, she turned her head. Her violet eyes locked onto his. There was no warmth in that gaze. There was no sadness, no leftover love. There was only an arctic, terrifying indifference. It was the look a lioness gives a particularly insignificant beetle before crushing it. Just as quickly as it connected, her gaze moved on. She looked at Vanessa, who was staring open-mouthed at the tiara, with a flicker of amusement, and then continued toward the stage. Richard felt like he had been punched in the gut. The room was spinning. "That's—" Vanessa stammered, pointing a shaky finger. "Richard, that looks like—" "It's not her," Richard said quickly, his voice high and desperate. He was gasping for air. "It's a doppelganger. It's a coincidence. Jenny is from Idaho. She's nobody." But as Lady Genevieve took her seat at the throne-like chair at the head table, the man sitting next to her, the silver-haired Baron von Hesse, who had snubbed Richard earlier, kissed her hand. Richard realized with sickening clarity that the Baron wasn't just some businessman. He was her subordinate. The pieces crashed together in Richard's mind. The sealed government file, the sudden loss of the Kensington account, the strange calm when she signed the divorce papers. "I'm coming home." He remembered her saying that on the phone when he thought she was crying upstairs. He hadn't just divorced his wife. He had declared war on a duchess, and he was standing on the battlefield armed with absolutely nothing. Dinner was a blur of misery for Richard. While the rest of the room feasted on lobster thermidor and truffle risotto, he couldn't swallow a bite. His eyes were glued to the head table, where his ex-wife, the woman who used to clip coupons for laundry detergent, was currently laughing at a joke made by the French ambassador. Every movement she made was graceful, practiced. It was as if the clumsy, shy Jenny had been a character she played, a costume she had finally taken off. "Stop staring!" Vanessa hissed, kicking him under the table. She had downed 3 martinis in rapid succession. "You're making us look pathetic. If that is her, go up there and claim your stake. You were married to her for 5 years. That makes you, I don't know, a duke? A prince?" Vanessa's eyes gleamed with greed. The humiliation of the red carpet was forgotten. Now she saw a lottery ticket. "It's not that simple," Richard whispered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "I made her sign a settlement. A clean break." "You what?" Vanessa nearly shrieked, drawing looks from the table next to them. You signed away a royal fortune for 10 grand? Richard, you are the most incompetent man I have ever met. Before Richard could respond, the room quieted again. The host tapped the microphone. And now, a few words from our guest of honor, Her Royal Highness, Duchess Genevieve. Genevieve stood up. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice projected with clear, trained authority. She looked out over the sea of faces, her gaze sweeping the room. Thank you, she began. Tonight we celebrate heritage. But heritage is not just about bloodlines or titles. It is about character. It is about the quiet dignity of loyalty. Richard felt like the air in the room was getting thinner. For the past 5 years, Genevieve continued, her eyes briefly flicking toward the back of the room, near the kitchen doors. I stepped away from my duties. I wanted to understand what life was like without the protection of my name. I wanted to see if I could be loved for me, not for what I could provide. A hush fell over the crowd. This was juicy gossip. The Duchess was going off script. I lived a simple life, she said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. I learned to cook, I learned to budget, and I learned that for some people, value is only skin deep. I learned that there are men who will look at a rough diamond and see only a rock, because they lack the vision to see the shine within. She paused, and the silence was deafening. I was discarded, she said clearly, traded in for a newer, shinier model, because I was deemed poor, because I didn't fit the aesthetic of success. Gasps rippled through the room. People were whispering. Who? Who would dump a duchess? But, Genevieve raised her glass, her voice hardening into steel. I am grateful for that lesson, because it taught me that a queen does not need a king to build an empire. She only needs to remove the jesters from her court. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Women were cheering. Richard felt like he was going to vomit. She was talking about him. She was mocking him in front of the most powerful people on earth. I can't take this, Richard muttered. The alcohol and the panic mixed into a dangerous cocktail in his brain. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Sit down, Vanessa hissed. No, Richard said, his eyes wild. She's my wife. She can't do this to me. She's playing a game. He started walking. At first, no one noticed. But as he marched past the middle tables, heading straight for the head table, people started to turn. Jenny! Richard shouted. The music stopped. The applause died instantly. Richard stumbled past the dance floor, his face red. Jenny! Stop the act! You're coming home! Security guards stepped forward from the shadows, massive men in black suits. But Genevieve raised a hand, signaling them to hold. She stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at him with an expression of mild curiosity, as if he were a drunk tourist. Sir, a guard stepped in front of Richard. Back away. Get out of my way, Richard shoved the guard, which was like shoving a brick wall. That is my wife. Tell them, Jenny. Tell them we're married. Genevieve picked up the microphone again. The room was deadly silent. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice cool and amplified. You seem confused. You filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. You expedited the process. You paid me $10,000 to, and I quote, get out of your life immediately. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Cruel, mocking laughter. I didn't know, Richard stammered, realizing too late that he was standing alone in the spotlight of his own making. You lied to me. You trapped me. I didn't lie, Richard, she said softly. I just didn't tell you everything. I wanted to see if you loved me. You failed the test. But I love you, Richard screamed, desperate now. I made a mistake. Vanessa means nothing to me. Take me back, Jenny. Please. At table 42, Vanessa stood up, her face humiliated and furious. She threw her napkin on the table and stormed out of the ballroom, leaving Richard alone. Genevieve looked at him with pity. The woman you loved was an illusion, Richard. And the woman you see before you? She is out of your league. She signaled the guards. Remove him. He is disturbing my dinner. 2 guards grabbed Richard by the arms. As they dragged him backward, kicking and screaming, the entire ballroom watched. The elite of Chicago, the people he had tried so hard to impress, were shaking their heads in disgust. Let me go! She's my wife! I own half of everything! I own half the kingdom! Richard raved as the door slammed shut, cutting off his screams. Richard was thrown, literally thrown, into a small, windowless security office in the bowels of the hotel. He stumbled, catching himself on a metal desk, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The room hummed with the sound of a server rack in the corner, a stark, cold contrast to the orchestral music playing upstairs. He checked his reflection in the darkened window. His tuxedo was torn at the shoulder, his bow tie hung loose, and his hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. He looked like a madman. He paced the small room for 20 minutes, his mind racing, trying to reconstruct a strategy. He kept repeating that word like a mantra. She is my wife. We were married in Illinois. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. It didn't matter if she was a duchess. It didn't matter if she was the Queen of England. Marriage was a legal contract, and Richard knew contracts. He was entitled to half of her assets acquired during the marriage. If she had billions, he was entitled to millions. He would sue her. He would sue the hotel. He would sue everyone. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open. Richard spun around, expecting a police officer. Instead, 2 men walked in. The first was Arthur, the man Richard had seen on the balcony, now identified as her assistant. He carried a leather briefcase that looked more expensive than Richard's car. The second man was older, wearing a charcoal grey suit that was tailored to frightening perfection. He had eyes like a shark, flat, black, and utterly devoid of empathy. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur said, his voice crisp. He didn't offer a hand. He sat on the edge of the desk, looking down at Richard. "I am Arthur Penhaligon, Royal Secretary to the House of Ardo. This is Mr. Stone, the family's international counsel." "I want to see my wife," Richard spat, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "I demand to see her." "You have no wife," Mr. Stone said. His voice was like grinding gravel. He opened a file on the desk. "The divorce decree was finalized by a judge at 9 a.m. this morning. You paid the extra $300 for the expedited service, remember?" "I'll contest it," Richard bluffed, slamming his hand on the table. "I was defrauded. She hid assets. That voids the settlement. In the eyes of the law, if one party conceals wealth, the agreement is null and void. I'll take her for everything she's worth." Mr. Stone smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had already eaten. "An interesting theory, Mr. Sterling," the lawyer said. "And usually you would be correct. However, in this specific case, you have legally tied your own hands." Mr. Stone pulled a document from the file. Richard recognized it immediately. It was the DIY divorce settlement he had typed up on his laptop 2 weeks ago. He had downloaded a template from a budget legal website to avoid paying a lawyer. "Do you recognize this?" Mr. Stone asked. "I wrote it," Richard sneered. "So I know what's in it." "Do you?" Mr. Stone put on a pair of reading glasses. "Because you added a custom clause, Mr. Sterling. Clause 4, Section B. You wrote this yourself, didn't you? You were very proud of it at the time." Richard froze. He remembered. He had added that clause because he had a secret savings account with a $5,000 bonus he didn't want Jenny to know about. He wanted to make sure she couldn't touch his hard-earned money. Mr. Stone began to read aloud, enunciating every word. Both parties agree that this is a non-disclosure settlement. Furthermore, both parties explicitly agree to waive the right to financial discovery. Both parties agree that any and all assets, known or unknown, held by either party prior to, during, or after the marriage, shall remain the sole property of the original titular owner, regardless of value. This waiver is absolute and irrevocable. The silence in the room was deafening. "You wrote an absolute waiver clause," Arthur said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You were so terrified that she would ask for a few $100s of your bonus that you legally blocked yourself from claiming a penny of her fortune." "No," Richard whispered, the blood draining from his face. That can't hold up in court." "It is ironclad," Mr. Stone said, closing the folder with a snap. "You drafted it. You insisted she sign it without counsel. You forced the terms. No judge in America will overturn a contract that you wrote to protect yourself, simply because it backfired." "Do you know what you walked away from, Richard?" Arthur asked softly. Richard stared at him, unable to speak. Arthur began to list items on his fingers. The Ardeux estate in the Loire Valley, valued at €80 million. The penthouse in Monaco. The shipping fleet in Greece. The family jewelry collection, which includes the star of Ardeux sapphire you saw tonight, valued at $12 million alone. Richard felt physically ill. The room was spinning. He grabbed the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. "Total estimated value of the assets you waived your right to?" Arthur paused for effect. "Approximately $450 million. 400, Richard choked. Million? He had traded $450 million to protect a $5,000 bonus. I didn't know," Richard gasped, tears of frustration stinging his eyes. "I'll go to the press. I'll tell them she's a fraud. I'll write a book." "You could," Mr. Stone shrugged. "But we would countersue for emotional distress, defamation, and breach of privacy. And unlike you, Mr. Sterling, the House of Ardeux has the resources to keep this in court for the next 50 years. We will drain you until you are selling your blood for bus fare." "Do you really want to fight us?" Richard slumped into the chair. He was beaten. Thoroughly, completely beaten. Arthur stood up and smoothed his suit jacket. "However, Her Highness is generous. She has authorized one final kindness." He reached into his pocket and placed a check on the metal desk. "She is returning your settlement money," Arthur said. "She doesn't want your $10,000, Richard. She spends that on flower arrangements for the lobby." Richard stared at the check. It felt like a slap in the face. It was a symbol of his own cheapness. "She also has a message for you," Arthur said, walking to the door. Richard looked up, his eyes red and hollow. "What?" Arthur paused, his hand on the doorknob. He looked at Richard with a mixture of pity and disgust. She said, "The roast chicken was delicious. It's a shame you were too busy looking at your phone to taste it. You never knew what you were eating, and you never knew who you were sleeping next to." Arthur opened the door. The sound of laughter and applause drifted down from the ballroom, a world Richard had been exiled from forever. "Goodbye, Mr. Sterling," Arthur said. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place. Richard was left alone in the cold, fluorescent-lit room, with a check for $10,000 and the crushing realization that his arrogance had cost him a kingdom. The fall wasn't just swift, it was a landslide. When Richard was finally released from the hotel security office at 2 a.m., the adrenaline had faded, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. He was shoved out of the service entrance into a grimy alleyway behind the hotel. It was raining. A cold, miserable Chicago drizzle that soaked through his torn tuxedo jacket in seconds. He patted his pockets. His wallet was there, but it felt lighter. His dignity was gone entirely. He pulled out his phone. The screen cracked from when he had dropped it during the struggle with the guards. The notification light was blinking furiously, a strobe light of disaster. He had 63 missed calls. 5 were from Vanessa. 58 were from numbers he didn't recognize. Reporters, likely. He opened the text from Vanessa first. He needed her. He needed to vent, to scheme, to figure out how they were going to spin this. "Don't bother coming home tonight. I'm packing my things. I checked the registration on the Porsche, and since you were trying to be clever with your assets last month, it's legally mine. I'm taking it. Also, I blocked your number. You're embarrassing. V." Richard stared at the screen, rain dripping off his nose. She was gone. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for had jumped ship the moment the water reached her ankles. Next, he opened his work email. The subject line was in bold red. Notice of immediate termination. "Richard, following your conduct at the Silver Leaf Gala, which was live-streamed by several attendees and witnessed by our key shareholders, you are hereby terminated from Apex Logistics for gross misconduct. Your company credit cards have been deactivated. Security will box up your personal effects. Do not attempt to enter the premises." He tried to hail a ride-share app, but when he clicked Request, a red banner popped up. Payment method declined. He had to walk. It took him 3 hours to walk back to the suburbs. By the time he reached his driveway, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a grey, unforgiving light on his life. The driveway was empty. The Porsche was gone. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence of the house was heavy, suffocating. It smelled of stale perfume and emptiness. Vanessa hadn't just left. She had looted the place. The expensive abstract art they had bought last week? Gone. The espresso machine? Gone. She had even taken the silk drapes, leaving the windows bare and exposing the living room to the street. All that was left was the white leather sofa, the one Jenny had hated because it was cold and uninviting. Now, it was the only place Richard could sit. He collapsed onto it, shivering in his damp clothes. He pulled his phone out again to assess the damage. He typed his name into the search bar. His heart stopped. He was trending. The blind CEO was the #1 topic on Twitter. He clicked on a video with 4 million views. It was a TikTok recorded by a waiter at the gala. It showed Richard screaming, "I own half the kingdom," while being dragged away by security. The comments were brutal. Imagine fumbling a literal duchess for a marketing manager with bad taste in shoes. LMAO. This guy thought he was the main character, but he was just the NPC in her origin story. I used to work for Richard Sterling. He once fired me for being 5 minutes late. Karma is a duchess. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a national joke. He wasn't a tragic figure. He was a meme. The entire world was laughing at his arrogance. Richard scrolled further and found an article from the Chicago Tribune. The Cinderella Reverse. Duchess Genevieve reveals how she tested her husband's character. The article featured a quote from Genevieve given at the after-party. "I never hid who I was," she had told the press. "I simply removed the trappings of wealth to see if the love was real. I wanted a partner who loved the book, not the cover. Unfortunately, Mr. Sterling never bothered to read the pages." Richard threw the phone across the room. It smashed against the wall, cracking further. He walked into the kitchen. The granite countertops, which he had insisted on upgrading, felt like tombstones. On the counter, near the sink, he saw something small. He walked over. It was a recipe card. It was written in Jenny's neat, looping handwriting. Richard's favorite roast chicken. It was stained with grease and worn at the edges. She had used this card for 5 years to make him happy. She had cooked for him, cleaned for him, and listened to him complain about his co-workers, all while sitting on a fortune that could buy his entire company 10 times over. She hadn't been weak. She had been restraining herself. She had made herself small so he could feel big. And he had repaid her by handing her a manila envelope and a check for $10,000. He looked down at the table. The check Arthur had given him in the security room was still clutched in his hand. Pay to the order of Richard Sterling. Amount $10,000. Memo. For your trouble. He stared at the numbers. $10,000. That was the price tag he had put on her love, and now it was the only asset he had left in the world. A sob ripped through his throat. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was an ugly, guttural sound of a man who realized he had held the moon in his hands and traded it for a flashlight. He slid down the kitchen cabinets until he hit the floor. He curled up on the cold tile. The check crumpled in his fist. The house was silent. No roast chicken cooking in the oven. No soft humming from the garden. No violet eyes looking at him with adoration. Richard Sterling was finally the master of his own domain. He had the big house, which the bank would take in a month, the leather furniture, and the complete, total silence he had always said he wanted. He closed his eyes, the image of Genevieve in her tiara burning behind his eyelids. He was the king of nothing. And that, my friends, is the tragic, satisfying downfall of Richard Sterling. He thought he was playing 4D chess with his life, but he didn't realize he was just a pawn in a much bigger game. It's a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. When you treat people like disposable objects, don't be surprised when you end up in the trash yourself. Genevieve went on to run her foundation, helping millions of people and becoming a global icon of grace and strength. As for Richard, well, rumor has it he's currently managing the night shift at a fast food joint in Ohio, telling anyone who will listen that he used to be married to a queen. But of course, nobody believes him. What would you have done if you were Genevieve? Would you have revealed yourself sooner, or was the public humiliation at the gala the perfect revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story of arrogance getting exactly what it deserves. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.